Good evening. Welcome to the Religious Nut and Hellbound Sinner podcast. And if I ever get on HRT and go through voice therapy to raise my voice to a more feminine tone, I will still be able to drop back down to that same decibel, which makes us transgender individuals wondrous unicorns. Anyway, I am your favorite Hellbound Sinner, Chris Cheshire, here for my second Mini-Me Hellbound Sinner episode. And to prepare for tonight, grab your mushrooms, grab your acid tablets, whatever does it for you. We are talking about Alice in Wonderland. This actually was an idea recommended by your favorite kingy and mine, Brother James, and I'm not too sure why, but might have nothing to do with the fact that it's my favoriteest story, book, movie, idea, thing. So, we're gonna go with that. I'm just kind of hit the highlights of what I appreciate about, first of all, the books, and then other interpretations of it. Some themes that stick out to me, ways I think that it's kind of impacted culture, and I'm not relegated to make this an objective review, so it's gonna be heavily biased based on what I like about it. Because this is my show, and this is my episode, so I'm gonna do whatever I want to with it. And that's what you like about this place. Just admit it. So, a little bit of background with my experience with the Alice stories. I actually did not read Lewis Carroll's books until I was in my teenage years, and my experience with the stories was really with the original Disney cartoon from the 1950s, and I watched the shit out of that from as early as I can remember, probably around 3 years old, all the way through my childhood. I actually spent one summer in 1995 after we moved to Pennsylvania where every single morning I'd get up before anybody else in the house did and I'd plop that VHS into my VCR and I'd watch Alice in Wonderland. So I think a lot of my perceptions of these stories are kind of start from my foundation there with the cartoon, and not as much with the books, although I love them as well. But starting with the Lewis Carroll novels, to be clear, the first one is not called Alice in Wonderland, it's called Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. The second one is called Through the Looking Glass. A little bit of background about each of them is that Lewis Carroll had developed some close relationships with children, and he wrote each of these books for a particular child in his life, and each one of them was written for a different girl. Ironically, each of them were named Alice. In the first book, Alice goes down the rabbit hole that people are so familiar with and goes to a place that she calls Wonderland, and a lot of the structure in that world is based around a deck of cards. In the second book, same Alice in this one goes through a looking glass or a mirror into a completely different world than she went into before, and experiences a wide range of other whimsical and insane characters, but the structure of that world is based around a chessboard or a chess set. And really, a lot of film adaptations have kind of combined elements of both books into one movie. It's very rare that you'll find a film or dramatization of either book where they just focus on the material from that particular book. There's a couple of less known ones out there, and in my mind they didn't really sell it as well as they could have, but maybe I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit in terms of the film adaptations that I'm going to be getting onto a little bit later. But I think some of the most striking aspects of the Alice books that people tend to talk about the most are some of the references that seem to be alluding to drug use, such as the pills or mushrooms or the bottle of potion that Alice drinks or eats in order to change her size or change her perspective of herself or the area around her. And it could be accurate. I don't think there was ever any statement from Lewis Carroll where he actually confirmed or denied that perspective, which I think that's a beauty of any work of art, and with this one in particular, is you can really take from it what you will. You can project onto it what you want to be there. And whether or not it's literally about drug use, there's a lot of elements that come up through this that can play out somewhat like some sort of an acid trip or a dream state. And one thing that sticks out to me, in most film versions, when Alice eats the thing that says "eat me" and grows, her whole body expands to a giant size. Whereas in the original book, once she took the pill that said "eat me," her body didn't grow, her neck expanded up really tall, and her head was several feet in the air above her body. And I think that there are many allusions and many different symbols in these books that talk about really deep psychological phenomenon and things that each one of us experience at different places in our lives. And something that I take away from that maybe I project onto that symbol about Alice's head being so far above her body is a form of what we would call dissociation, or where sometimes we can feel totally numb, out of our body, or disconnected from our feelings. So take from that any meaning that you would want to. Another thing that people or critics talk a lot about in terms of the original Alice books is all of the cultural allusions and satire that's written into the narrative framework of the novels. And actually, just on a generic read from anybody from our time era in these novels, there's several things that might not be as funny or as relevant to us in the culture that we're in now. One thing I found really helpful, there's a publication of both works, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, published by Norton about a decade or so ago. It's called The Annotated Alice. It's part of a series of books that Norton published, different original works, in which, with the Alice novels, there's a commentary on the side of each page where it describes what a lot of those cultural allusions or satires could have been referring to at the time, that can give the reader, looking back a century and a half ago, a depth of understanding of what some of the people at the time would have been understanding with this. Very much like, let's say, 150 years in the future, people are watching South Park, and they have no clue what all those different cultural references or satire in that show's referring to. So it'd be much like if somebody made an audio commentary 150 years in the future about South Park. A few of my favorite characters in these books are always going to be the Cheshire Cat and the Caterpillar, most likely the Mad Hatter, and I love the Walrus and the Carpenter in their little segment. And another one that I'm always fascinated by is the White Knight from Through the Looking Glass. I'm not going to spend too much time on each of them, but one thing that I love the most about the character of the Caterpillar is Alice just walks up on him and he's sitting on his mushroom chilling, smoking his hookah, and he doesn't say much to her or provide her with much information, and he just keeps asking her over and over, "Who are you?" And she keeps saying, "I hardly know. I've changed so much. Who am I?" And it's almost a gateway into some deeper stages in her journey here, and this is kind of leading into the way that I personally interpret a lot of these aspects of the Alice stories, is that in many ways it's representative of somebody exploring themselves, somebody exploring their own psyche, because every one of us have different personalities or different parts within us that can be symbolized in different ways. Psychologists have been talking about this all the way back to Carl Jung, who was an understudy of Sigmund Freud. And I think the beauty of works like this, where the characters in it don't have their own literal, well-developed, well-fleshed-out, complex personality. They're snippets, they're pieces. I mean, the Mad Hatter and the March Hare and the Dormouse and the Mad Tea Party are simply there for Alice to come in and take a shit on him and say, just what are you guys doing? And they're just sitting around drinking their tea, and who knows? 5 years later, Alice could come back to Wonderland and they'd still be sitting there, that same exact spot, having tea, doing their same damn thing. Or who knows, they could have evolved into something else because Alice has evolved. This Wonderland is not like a literal world like this one. It's very dreamlike. It's very metaphorical. Let's take her relationship with the Queen of Hearts, for example. The Queen is kind of a conglomerate of both a demanding and disapproving mother figure, but at the same time a very demanding and rageful child. It could really be seen as what would it be like if a 3-year-old was fantasizing about being mom. Those are some things that, thinking about it psychologically as I do, that I appreciate about these works. A few other things I would like to touch on before I get into other film adaptations is there's one song that's been inspired by Alice Tales called White Rabbit, first sung by Jefferson Airplane. Emiliana Torini has made a fantastic cover of it. Torini is the one who sang Gollum's song during the closing credits of The Two Towers. In love with her voice so much. And ironically, if you go to YouTube and type in Jefferson Airplane White Rabbit, there's a video of that band back in the 60s singing both that song and Someone to Love, and at the very end there's about a 1-minute interview of this newscaster with the music band, and he goes up to them and asks them, so if we paid you, I don't remember how much, this much money right now, and gave you a suit and tie, could we convince an artist or a singer like you to go to work 8 to 5 days a week? And they all laughed at him and said, hell no. And in a way that kind of symbolizes a little bit of what these books are about. One thing I love so much about the irony in the character of Alice is that she starts out the stories by being very disillusioned and angry at the rigidity of society, and that everything has to be one way, and it's all so boring to her. And she starts by saying, you know, if I had my own world, everything would be a nonsense. Up would be down, down would be up. Someone could get lost in my imagination. And then she goes into her own imagination and does get lost, and not so much in the book, but more in some of the films. She gets to a place where she's so distraught and can't find her way out, and she just wants to go home. She goes up to all these different characters who are being completely irreverent, outlandish. Up is down and down is up. They do everything differently from society, which is exactly what she wanted. But when she gets there and gets it and gets to see these people, she starts making the same exact rigid demands on them. No, it has to be this way. What the f are you doing, guys? You know, I love that irony there in the complexity of Alice's character. So a few of my favorite film adaptations of these books. First of all, you guessed it, is the 1954, I think was the year. Damn, I didn't IMDb this ahead of time. Well, if you can correct me on the exact year, I don't care. The Disney cartoon. I really believe this is probably one of the definitive film adaptations of the books still, 60-something years later. It's one thing I love so much about it is this is not that well known about the movie, but 5 different directors worked on it, and they all broke up different segments of the movie and tackled them, and they were all kind of competing with each other to see who could outdo the other for being so outrageous and outlandish in their artwork, and it really shows through in the product, and it's almost going through something so crazy to something else even more insane, or back again, which does play out very much like the book. Leonard Maltin, film critic that I both love and hate, has criticized the film for that reason, and he said that the film had no sort of goal in mind, or no direction, or no overall plot. But that criticism that he makes is really what the Alice books were about all along. It really didn't have an overall point or an overall plot. It was very episodic. So in that way, the Disney cartoon really communicates that. They really capture the overall mood and the dreamlike quality of it. And actually, in the end, they end up making it answer for you that she was dreaming the whole time. And I think a lot of those themes that I communicated, that I love so much about the books, were kind of communicated in this film. One other thing that I like so much about it, and if you get the 60th anniversary Blu-ray edition that I have and cherish, there's a special feature on there where they show some behind the scenes where several of the voice actors, Alice, Ed Wynn as the Mad Hatter, and the character that played the March Hare, and I believe the character that played the Dormouse, are all on this soundstage where they've constructed an entire set for the Mad Tea Party with backgrounds, table, chairs, teacups, all these props for the scene, and they're all in full costume, and they're sitting there acting out the entire scene with each other to really get in character, to feel each other, to feel themselves in the part, and to develop that chemistry between them. And I think that's a large strength of the film that shows through in the finished product, that they gave themselves that time to feel out their characters actually as though they were living it out and relating to each other. The other film adaptation that I love so much, this is a much less known piece. It was a Czech movie, as in Czechoslovakia, made in 1987, and I'm gonna butcher this guy's name, John Schwankmeyer. If anybody can figure out how to pronounce that better than I can, go for it. The English dubbed version is the one that I've seen available the most. The DVD or Blu-ray that you can get on Amazon also has the original Czech version with subtitles. But that film is probably the most unique Alice movie out there, and it's just called Alice. There's not much dialogue in it, and the only voice that you hear in the entire film is Alice's. As narrator, as herself, as the other characters, is very surreal. It really pulls out the dreamlike, or acid trip-like, if you will, quality of the story, and it's a blend of live action and stop-motion animation, and all the other characters in Wonderland are objects that you'd see in a little girl's room. The Mad Hatter is a toy soldier. The White Rabbit was a stuffed rabbit that she had in her bedroom. The Caterpillar is a sock with eyes glued to it. And when the Queen of Hearts is raging, she literally has a pack of cards, and the White Rabbit goes up and takes scissors to the cards' heads. And the movie also pulls out a lot of darker themes about this almost being a child's imaginary play where a 3 or 4-year-old, or even a 5 or 6-year-old, is going to be channeling some unconscious rage in the play that they do. One example is the stuffed White Rabbit. Throughout this, he ended up ripping a part of his chest open when he escaped from her menagerie that she had, and he's leaking all his sawdust out, and he keeps his pocket watch inside of his chest, and as he's going throughout, he keeps picking up random wood chips he keeps dropping and keeps eating them to fill himself back up. And there's times when she's out of curiosity chasing after other characters, but in her childish rage destroys them in the process. So there's a lot of themes explored in this movie that a lot of others really don't tend to hit at. So I'd recommend that one very much. I think it was on Netflix a while back. Don't know if it still is. I'm not going to spend much time on other film adaptations. I'd say I've given a lot of them a fair try, and I'd say they're really hit or miss, and in my opinion, more miss than hit. There was another really out-of-the-box one. It was a miniseries called Alice, made in 2009, that I really feel went in a direction that was not really true to the spirit of the stories overall. Some people really liked it. About the only thing that I liked about it was the character that played the White Knight. And I found my first movie where I was actually disappointed in a Tim Curry performance. He played the dodo, not the bird from the books, but a crime boss. And he was just lackluster in my opinion, so yeah. Watch it, form your own opinion, but I will give another minute or two to talk about Tim Burton's Disney's bastardizations of Alice. The first one, released back in '09, Alice in Wonderland, and the one released last year, Alice Through the Looking Glass. Honestly, they have precious little to do with anything about what the books really were intended to do in the first place. Wonderland, now called Underland, is another literal world much like this one, and the characters there have more personality, more complex characterization. The Mad Hatter has this whole long PTSD backstory with his family getting captured, and Alice time travels to save him, and the Queen of Hearts and the White Queen, which don't ask me how the Queen of Hearts and the White Queen from a chessboard from two different books are going to have anything to do with each other in the same world, but somehow they were sisters when they were younger, and there's all this backstory into their conflict with each other. And the first film follows out the very cliche main character fulfills the prophecy motif. And honestly, I thought about this a lot. I really think that if these films were made as they are, but not attached to the Alice stories, like the characters were original and not even based on any Alice characters, that I might have actually enjoyed these movies somewhat. But as it is attached to the Alice saga, it was a huge disappointment to me, and it is to many others. If you'd like to watch Nostalgia Critic, he has a couple videos on these that I really enjoyed. But I know a lot of people who've loved those films, and my sister's one of them, and we've had a few tit-for-tats about them, and it's been fun. And finally, in regards to Lewis Carroll, the thing we are all wanting to secretly know, or not so secretly, was Lewis Carroll a pedophile? Here are the facts that we know. Lewis Carroll did develop close relationships with children, female and male. he developed close relationships with adults, male and female. I've read all sorts of interpretations of history on both sides of this argument. Honestly, there is not enough evidence to conclude he was a pedophile, but some of the arguments for it are pretty strong. Some of the arguments against it are pretty strong. He was a photographer, and he advanced a lot in that technology in its early stages. But he has 4 drawings of children in the nude, but at the same time, they're not overtly sexual. He had a lot of letters written to some children he developed relationships with. They're more whimsical and nothing really inappropriate. So I would caution against interpreting too much into it, and at the same time, the Freudian in me wants to interpret more into it. I mean, it could be he was sexually attracted to them and held himself back, or it could be he kept it a secret. We, looking back a century and a half later, are probably never going to know. So, sorry, not sorry, I have to disappoint y'all. I'm not going to be able to give a definitive answer on this. He could have been, and he could not have been. So I think that wraps it up pretty succinctly here. I don't think we've done this yet, but if this was posting to YouTube or a place where we could allow for comments, I'd say post your perspective on any of this. What do you like or hate about some of these Alice interpretations or about the stories? And what are your thoughts on some of them? So that about wraps it up. I am your favorite Hellbound sinner, Chris Cheshire. And we shall be coming back with another dual episode, and we have a lot of great things lined up for the next few weeks, so until then, I am going to go finish off this bottle of vodka. Peace.